So, thanks very much for coming. Appreciate you all turning up to hear me speaking about data modeling. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for getting in touch and inviting me to come down. So I've travelled down from Preston up in Lancashire today. A little bit about me. So my name's Johnny. My pronouns are he, him. I currently work for a company called Advancing Analytics. Anybody heard of us? Cool. So we are a consultancy. We specialise in data and analytics. So we have a data engineering practice, which is all about building data platforms. We are a Databricks partner, so it's predominantly built on Databricks. We do a little bit of Fabric as well. As well as data engineering, we've got an AI team who do lots of clever, boffiny things that I don't really understand. I can't even spell LLM, so that's nothing to do with me. But we have an analytics practice as well. That's where I come in. I'm a principal consultant in our analytics team. And what that involves is once our clever engineers have built a platform, ingested all this data in there and sort of done that data ingestion at scale, the analytics team come in and then we sort of work with the business users to model that data into something that's going to be useful for them, and then possibly provide things like semantic models so they can do self-service and possibly some dashboards and things like that on top of that as well. So yeah, data modeling is my happy place. In my spare time, I run the website and YouTube channel, and I've got a Substack now as well, Grayskull Analytics. You can check out grayskullanalytics.com. Yes, Grayskull is a He-Man reference. You might spot the odd He-Man reference throughout the presentation. And then also in my spare time, I like getting involved with community stuff. So I'm one of the organisers of the Manchester Power BI user group, or even though we still call it PBI Manchester, it is actually now the Fabric Power BI Manchester user group, also sponsored by Robert Horses. That has been running for 8 years now. I didn't help set it up. Let's think, I've been on the organising team for 2 years now. So Alex Taylor, who's works with Matt. Where's Matt? Matt at the back. He set that up 8 years ago. Even though I didn't help organise it in the first instance, I went to the very, very first one. And so kind of on part of my sort of professional journey in terms of getting involved in that community and sort of me learning about Power BI and all those things was through me coming to user groups. When I first started doing any kind of public speaking, the Manchester Power BI user group was the first thing that I ever spoke at as well. So these kind of user group type events are just a great opportunity if you fancy doing a bit of speaking, if you've got a bit of experience in the field and you think, oh, actually, I'd like to share some knowledge with the community. They tend to be nice and friendly. They're pretty informal. It's pretty chill, isn't it? Yeah. So yeah, get involved. Matt already mentioned they're looking for some lightning speakers for next month. So absolutely 100% jump on board. As an organizer, if people are happy to get involved and speak for us, we really, really appreciate it. So I absolutely recommend doing that. In terms of my career, I've been doing data roles since 2007. And I know it's 2007 because somewhere in my house, I've got a certificate of a Crystal Reports course that I went on. Anyone heard of Crystal Reports? Anyone remember Crystal Reports? Cool. So that was my early days way back when. And that career has taken me through various industries. So I've worked in the defence industry, online retail, travel, financial services, and my last 3 roles have all been consultancy jobs. So I work in consultancy now. For me, it's been a very much an accidental data career. So I was actually doing politics and philosophy at university, dropped out, worked as a barman. So you can tell at this point it's the classic route into becoming a data consultant. And I ended up doing a relatively menial office job in finance, and I picked up Excel, and it snowballed from there. Before I knew it, I was messing about with Access databases. I started picking up some SQL. I got sent on this Crystal Reports course, and then yeah, from there. I got into sort of full stack data warehouse development on like Microsoft type stack, and then moved into cloud technologies. And yeah, it really snowballed. So I like to say to people that if I can have the career that I've had, given my background, the career I've had working in data, I think absolutely anybody can. That is enough about me bleating on about myself. I'm here to talk to you about data modeling for superstars. So there's a change on the agenda because originally this had a really boring title that said gathering requirements for your star schema. And then when I got a new slide deck and I was like, and a new theme, and I was like, oh yeah, this looks cool. I'm going to give it a jazzier name for the talk. So it's now Data Modeling for Superstars. Just in case nobody gets it, it's a really clever title because you guys can all be superstars, and this is all for you. This is data modeling for you, and you are all superstars. But also, I want you to model super star schemas, and I'd like to model them collaboratively. So I want this to be how to model collaboratively with your business users, your end users, how to do it effectively. Why is this important? Why is this a theme that I get, and I will get animated about it, in case you've not noticed already? Why do I think collaborative data modeling is particularly important? Anybody familiar with this scenario? Stick your hand up if this has happened to you. And anyone that didn't stick your hand up, I think you're lying. So this is an image from a guy called Shane Gibson. If you don't already follow him on LinkedIn, he's really, really good. But yeah, classic data team. Build something, stakeholder. Oh, that's not what I wanted, but it is what you asked for. And you end up with this kind of bun fight almost, where the data team start to grumble and, oh, business don't know what they're talking about, and people start accusing, oh, those business users, they're not very data literate, are they? Oh, they don't really know what they're on about, do they? Not good. Not a good situation to get into when you end up with this. The flip side of this, I like to encourage data teams to have a bit of introspection and look at themselves as well. So this is, does anyone know Seattle data guy, Benjamin Rogosian? He's on LinkedIn and YouTube as well. So this is something he posted the other day. How do we get the business to be more data literate? Trainings, office hours, maybe data professionals ought to be try and become a little bit more business literate themselves. So as data professionals, we might be expert in things like how to write a good index on a database, or how the Vertipack engine compresses our data, or what's good DAX and things like that. That's really our realm as data professionals. The people who run the business are the people who really know how the business works. So we should lean on their experience. If we talk about things like product thinking, which is quite a sort of trendy topic at the moment, this idea of domain-driven design, which is another sort of popular topic, those both rely on you harnessing the knowledge of those people who actually run the business on a day-to-day basis to make sure you can build the right data products and the right sort of data capabilities for them. So if you end up with this scenario, it isn't always necessarily about the stakeholders not knowing what they want, and the data team should make the effort to try and become a bit more business literate as well. When you do have this standoff between those two parties, it can lead to an awful lot of frustration and people tearing their hair out and lots of friction. So there's many things that sort of lead to this friction. So for starters, from a data team perspective, you end up with this sort of having to do rework, having to do several iterations. You just want to do it once and get it out the door, and you want it to be working and providing value for the business. But you end up having to revisit it, and version 1 and version 2, and all that rework is costing you time. If it's costing you time, it's costing you money. So there's a cost associated with that sort of constant cycle of having to sort of rework it and do it. The business users themselves, they don't really want to go through all that rework either. They want something that just works for them straight away as soon as possible. So they're going to be frustrated as well. And almost the worst thing that can possibly happen is that because they're not getting what they want, they just end up abandoning it and not using it. So you put all these hours and days of work into something, and then it doesn't end up being used because it doesn't really solve the problem that the business had in the first place. Has anybody ever published a report or a dashboard somewhere, and then when you looked at the stats of it being used, it's just a flat line and nobody's looking at it? Hands up, anyone? Come on, people, be vulnerable, be honest, share. So we want to avoid that. Basically, we want to try and get our end users and our business stakeholders on the same page as our development teams and the people that can actually build the capability. And so what I want to take you through today is effectively a framework for being able to do that. Get those two groups of people talking in the same language about the same things and working towards a common goal so that you can all turn into data modeling superheroes. So the first thing that I think is probably worth tackling is whether or not star schema is still even relevant, right? Because if you go on the internet, I'm sure people here use the internet, right? There's all sorts of claims that data modeling and star schemas are dead. You'll see all sorts of thought pieces. Yeah, all these various things that sort of say, no, you don't want to do star schemas. They're old hat, they're old fashioned, they're not really relevant anymore. If you dig into a lot of these, there's normally a common theme that there's some kind of software vendor behind them, and it's in their best interest to stop you using star schemas. Because I would say that absolutely they are still relevant. So this is a Power BI user group. Just is everybody in the room already using Power BI, or is anybody who's just learned about it? Yeah. Cool. Okay. So number one rule of Power BI Club: don't talk about Power BI Club. Number two rule: star schemas. Basically, with Power BI, you need to be using a star schema, so it's relevant for that. But it's not just relevant in Power BI world either. So, for example, this is from the Databricks website. They're talking about dimensional modeling, which is another way to describe star schemas. That's absolutely a recommended pattern if you're working with Databricks. So again, with implementations we do, if we're doing a medallion architecture, for our gold layer, we will have a star schema in there. This is a little bit old. It's from the Synapse Analytics data modeling best practices. But if you went and read that article, guess what? Best practices use a star schema. And then this chap, I can never say his name, Pything Strengholt. He's Dutch, I believe. He was at Microsoft. He's just left. Can't remember where he's gone. But he's been writing a book about medallion architectures. And again, he will say, just here, doesn't show up on the screen. Kimball star schema is the best way to do that in a medallion architecture. So yes, it is still relevant. Now, the purpose of today's talk isn't really to teach you what a star schema is. So I guess quick show of hands again. And is there anybody who isn't sure what that star schema and isn't familiar with the term star schema? Okay, cool. So just to give you a very, very brief idea of star schema, it's a data modeling pattern. Generally, you will have fact tables, which have got measurements in them. Then you have dimension tables, which are like lookups, so that you can then describe the information around your measurements. That's as deep as I'm going to go in terms of what they are. But if it is something you want to learn about, these are basically the two pieces of reference material that basically I would say, if you are passionate about your craft and you really, really want to understand it, you should probably own one, if not both of those. So I'm just going to reiterate again, in terms of the framework that we're going to talk about, the different personas that are involved with it. So we have our developers. Again, I try and make these things quite interactive. Show of hands, who would describe themselves as a developer? So we're something very technical, writes code, understands the tech. Who here, the developer persona, would they call themselves? Cool. And then we've got our business users. So these are the people that are actually going to use the outputs of a data platform. They're probably going to be the people that are actually using any reports or any self-service data models that you might publish. They're the people who understand the business. They're people that on a day-to-day basis are actually going to use your reports and dashboards to make decisions to drive the business forward. They know what they want to see, but they're not always great at explaining it. Anybody in the room who would call themselves more a business user type of persona? Yeah, okay, cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through this collaborative data modeling technique, which is a framework that I've been using for nearly 10 years now. When I first started it, it's kind of evolved a bit over time. I sort of started doing this about 10 years ago. Has anybody ever seen me talk on this subject before? Cool. So you might have previously heard this referred to as something called Sunbeam. Sunbeam is a trademark of advancing analytics. So if I'm not doing an advancing analytics branded talk, I try not to use that terminology. But if you ever hear somebody say Sunbeam, this is what they're talking about. And I've been credited as being the inventor of Sunbeam, which sounds like really, really grandiose. Johnny Winter, inventor of Sunbeam. It should probably be my tagline on LinkedIn. But it's really just me ripping other people off. It's not like some monumental original thought leadership. Basically, I've taken a couple of data modeling techniques from other people, stripped out the bits that I liked, thrown away the bits I didn't like, and mashed them together to make my own thing. So the things I'm going to talk about are something called Beam. Anyone heard of that? Cool. And then something called sum modeling. Anyone heard of that? Cool. So Beam, well, I'm going to get to it. We'll go on the next slide. Beam comes from this book by Lawrence Carr, Agile Data Warehouse Design. And it stands for Business Event Analysis and Modeling. So this for me was a kind of a mindset change when I first came across it, because having sort of read Kimball, and Kimball talks about modeling business processes. Lawrence Carr talks about modeling business events. So everything becomes event centric. It's about the idea that we take a particular event, something happens, and then we record the information about that event. And then if we record lots of events, we can then trend them and analyze them over time and things like that. There are two specific parts of Beam that I rip off on a Schema bleak, which are the 3Ds and the 7Ws, and I will come to those later. So then the other technique is sum modeling, and I describe sum modeling as being a word of mouth technique. So with Beam, I can literally send you to the book. I can literally say, jump on Amazon, order this, it's great. It will explain to you exactly what Beam is. Sum modeling, you will find it very hard to find any material about it. There's a few corners of the internet where people talk about it. I came across it via other people talking about it. So I first came across it so I must have been doing this since 2016, not 2015. So that'd be 9 years, because I went to SQL Bits in Liverpool, and a lady called Emma Zambanini did a presentation about it. So that's the first I heard of it. And then a chap called Pete Moore, who was an independent data consultant at Manchester Way. He did a bit of work with a company I was working at the time called Travel Counsellors. It was a technique he used. And then Terry McCann. So Terry McCann's one of the directors, one of the owners at Advancing Analytics. It is a technique that he has talked about and used in the past previously. Those three people all have something in common, because they all went to the University of Dundee, where this chap, Professor Mark Whithorn, does a analytics course. And sum modeling is something that is of his invention, and it's something that he teaches to his students. Apparently, and I've never met him. I've only ever heard this technique from other people that have been tutored by him. Apparently, he keeps threatening to write a book about it and never gets around to it. But yeah, basically, he invented sum modeling. When he talks about sum modeling, he talks about three distinct types of data models. So he talks about a user model, a conceptual model, and a logical model. So talking you through all of those, what is a user model? This is an example of user models if it loads. So first of all, is anyone else using PowerPoint embedding with Power BI? Because it's ace. I love the fact you can just put a live Power BI report inside of your PowerPoint, which is pretty cool. So a user model is ultimately the way your users interact and recognize your data, typically charts, graphs, and tables. And as a requirements gathering technique, in terms of trying to find out what sort of data modeling we could do, that they can be a good starting point. So if I look at this, apologies, it's like it feels small to me all of a sudden, I'm stood next to it. But top left up here, we've got top performing product categories by revenue. So if I were to design a star schema, I'd look at this and I'd say, right, well, revenue is obviously one of my measures, and that's going to be some kind of sales factor table, perhaps. And then a product category, so that sort of says that maybe I'm going to have a product dimension that I can slice and dice by. And then over here, I've got revenue performance by, I don't think that is revenue. I'm pretty sure that that is order quantity. I think the title's wrong. I'll have to change that. It's basically showing order quantity over the last 12 or over the previous calendar year. So that I know I'm going to want to have order quantity in my fact table as well. I know that I'm going to want to have some kind of date dimension so that I can show that trend. I've got revenue by channel over here. So again, repeating the fact that I'm going to want to have revenue in a fact table. I'm probably going to want to have some kind of channel dimension. And then I've got a table here with some extra attributes in there as well. So I've got things like my product category description, subcategories, manufacturer, brand name, product label, which all sound like attributes that I'm probably going to want to add to some kind of product dimension. So I could look at that as a developer and as a way of gathering requirements and have an idea of a rudimentary data model that I could build that would have facts and dimensions that would support that analysis. But it'd be quite a blinkered view of the world. It'd be very, very specific to those particular set of metrics and those particular set of graphs. And like, what will happen is that you deliver that and your stakeholder will go, oh, that's great, that's fantastic. But also can just add a slicer for customer type, please. And it's like, oh, well, I didn't have anything relating to customer in it. And so that's not my data model. And now we're going to have to go back and we're going to have to get the engineers to bring all the customer data in. And then I'm going to have to build a new dimension. And then I'm going to have to rebuild my fact table with my new keys in it and all this kind of stuff. So it can be a start for 10, but like I say, they're quite blinkered. We probably want a more holistic view of the world. We want a bigger picture, not just answer the questions today, but be able to answer the questions of tomorrow. Out of interest, does anyone here, when they sort of start doing a piece of work, they tend to start with wireframes and doing this kind of exercise? Yeah. So I'm personally not a fan of starting with a wireframe. I think for me personally, this kind of understand the bigger landscape first and do the wireframes a little bit further down the road is what I would personally recommend. So that's a user model. Next up, I've got a logical model. So a logical model is more the technical representation of what we're going to build. So this here, I've got a database ERD diagram or entity relationship diagram. I've got a store dimension, a product dimension, date dimension, customer dimension, and channel dimension. I've got a sales table in the middle. I've got all of my foreign keys and primary keys declared. I've got all of my data types. I've got my cardinality with my crow's feet notation. As a developer, to build a model based on this would be great. Somebody could just sort of hand me that and say, oh, I needed to build that. Perfect. Do you think you can go to your stakeholders and say, oh, can you just give me the ERD that you want? Yeah? No. So the business users, they don't talk in this kind of language. This doesn't really mean anything to them. Perfect blueprint for a developer, right? Not much good for some, you're not going to expect a business user to be able to produce that for you. So ultimately, we want something that's going to be kind of the Goldilocks effect. I think it's going to fall in between these two extremes. User model is how the business sees data. Logical models, how developers might see the data. We want something that falls in between, that kind of has enough detail for the developers to do a good job, but it's still kind of high level enough for it to make sense to business people. And that is where a conceptual model comes in. And ultimately, sun modeling is a technique for building conceptual models. So this is all in business language, so in the concepts that are going to be associated with the analysis, the measures associated with the analysis, and sort of a vague idea of the relationships and hierarchies that are part of that design. So what we want to do then for this collaborative data modeling approach is we want to hold a workshop, or potentially a series of workshops, so that we can bring all these groups together, go through this collaborative process of designing this star schema together, right? First thing you're going to want to do is decide what the format's going to be. So back in the day when I first started doing this was fantastic. It was jump in a room, get around a whiteboard, get marker pens out, do some drawings, take some pictures, go off and build it after the event, which is always good fun. Then, of course, 2020 and the pandemic happened, everyone got sent home. And so we now tend to do these online using things like online whiteboards. So Miro and Mural are two that I've used. Anyone use either of those? Yeah, cool. I love Miro. I think Miro is great. Miro's got a particular template, a mind map template that works really, really well for this. So they're ones I'd recommend. Funny story. Last year, I got down to go to a client down in London, and it was to hold a Sunbeam workshop with them. And I got super excited because I've not done an in-person one of these for years. So I went to Staples and I bought new marker pens and I bought new post-it notes. And we got in the room and they had a nice, big, fresh, clean whiteboard. And I was like, going to get my consultant on, check me out. And then we went to start, and they said, "Oh, can we just do it on a digital whiteboard anyway? Because we want to have the digital footprint." And I was gutted. But there we go. Yeah, Miro or Mural, good online whiteboards for running this type of workshop. A recent discovery for me is a product called Ellie. Anyone heard of Ellie? Cool. It's pretty new. So in my presentation, I've got at the end of this, if I have enough time, I can do an Ellie demo for you. But apparently I've got all the time in the world because Chamleap's built. So just have to suffer me for a little bit extra time towards the end. Right, so you decided your format. For argument's sake, we're going to have an online workshop and we're going to use Miro. Next thing you need to do is make sure you invite the right people along. And I cannot stress enough, the whole point of this is collaborative. It's get your business users and your developers in the room together. Your business users should be driving this. This should be about their view of the world, how they see their data, and explaining how their business events and processes work, so that you can interpret that and turn that into a technical implementation. I worked with a client a couple of years ago now, and when we came to do the workshops, I said, "Oh, we're not going to invite the business users because they don't really know what they're on about. It's all right, we know better than them." It was like they totally missed the point. The amount of sort of hubris that's shown in terms of that, the techies know everything. No, lean into your business expertise. There's also a missed opportunity with that as well, because this is kind of unintentional. What we've found as we've sort of continued to sort of run these workshops is it helps with two other things. That sort of complaint I talked about earlier in terms of business users not being particularly data literate. If you bring them on this journey, get them involved in the design work, you actually kind of, by stealth, raise their data literacy, because you start to talk to them about concepts and how things hang together. And all of a sudden, when you do come to talking more technical data terms with them, there's a little bit more familiarity and they just have a little bit more instinct for how all these things work. And then the other thing is they end up with a little bit of skin in the game. So from an adoption perspective, you might do this requirements exercise at the beginning of a project. When you come to your go live, you're going to have a group of business users that you've had involved in the process that can got a bit of pride in the end result, a bit of, "Oh, I helped design and build this." And they're a bit more engaged and they're a bit more interested in using it once it actually gets published. So get the business users involved. It's good to have at least two people running the workshops, one facilitator and one scribe. Can I move this? Because I keep looking around it. Sorry. A facilitator and a scribe. So when I used to do these in person, I was not bad at facilitating and scribing at the same time, but definitely for the digital versions, I found that talking and trying to operate a digital whiteboard is something that I've personally struggled with. So we'll tend to have somebody facilitating and then somebody there as the operating the whiteboard, taking the notes and actually doing the operational bit of it. Choose one business process. This isn't a boil the ocean type approach. It's designed to be quite agile to an extent. We're not talking about designing an entire enterprise data warehouse. We're talking about focusing on a specific use case, a specific business process. Don't try and do everything all at once. And you want to make sure you've got sort of 3 to 5 people with domain knowledge that are there. So business users who are at the coalface, understand how the business works, are going to be using the end products and using this data to make the business decision, drive the business forward. You don't want to get too many, because that's too many cooks fall in the broth and you end up with too many voices in the room. You need to make sure that they're empowered people that can sort of make decisions about things on behalf of potentially wider groups and represent other parts of the business. But yeah, I'd always expect to be more business people in the room than technical people if you're doing this right. So we have decided on a format. We've invited our audience along, and we're now going to get into the structure of the workshops. So I talked about the 3Ds previously, and being one of the things that we steal from Beam. The 3Ds are discover an event. So discovering an event is about asking the question, who does what? So for a specific business process, what events happen within that business process? Then we want to describe the event, and we're going to describe the event using 7 Ws, which is the other thing that we stole from Beam. And then the third D is to document the event. So Beam itself comes with a whole set of artifacts and documentation that you're encouraged to use, and I always found them up so much of it, and it's overkill. So I kind of binned the documentation side of Beam, but basically adopted some modeling and my way of doing my documentation and actually capturing my requirements. When I first started doing this, we'd attempt all 3Ds in one workshop. Realistically, what we do nowadays, which we found to be far more effective, is we have one workshop to do event discovery. So we say, right, let's talk about your business process. Let's understand high level what the business process is and how it works. And let's list out all of the events. And then we ask people to prioritize the events. We say, right, if we needed analytics on just one of these events, what would be the most important? Where's the biggest opportunity in terms of us getting insight in terms of how we might improve our processes? So that then when we come to the actual some modeling, the describing and documenting of the event, we are only doing one event at a time in a separate workshop. So discovery of an event. Who does what? I'm going to give a pretty basic retail example here for the sake of demonstration. The who does what is the question we ask, and the reply is all in a specific format, customer-advised product, so you always end up with an actor and an action. So the who does what, the who can be a person or it could potentially be an organization as well. So it might be, as opposed to customer buys product, it might be courier delivers products. If you can imagine, like I'm going to do a pretty basic retail version with just one event. If you can imagine that we had events like customer orders product, manufacturer builds products, customer pays a product, courier delivers products, something along those lines. You'd have like a whole process end to end. I'm just going to keep this for a sort of high street shop type scenario to keep it simple. But yeah, who does what? All your events, actor and then action. Somebody does something. So customer buys product. I'm going to describe this event for us now. So I'm going to describe the event using the 7 Ws. This is painfully pretentious. I was an English literature student when I was at college. So this is a Rudyard Kipling little poem. I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. The names are what and why and when and how and where and who. There's only 6 Ws there. And then one of them's not even a W. But the 7 Ws are effectively, how do we go about describing our event? So we're going to ask these 7 questions. So customer buys the product. So who buys the product? What do they buy? When do they buy it? Where do they buy it? Why did they buy it? How do they buy it? And how many did they buy? Those kind of things. So we can basically take it for any given event, break it into this set of questions, and then that's going to help us build out the data model in a collaborative way. Which takes us to the documenting of the event. And to document the event, we do a SUN model. As I say, I tend to use an electronic whiteboard for this. And what I'll tend to do is set myself up like a SUN modeling canvas. So on my SUN modeling canvas, I'll always list what is the event that I'm going to describe. I'll give myself a list of the 7 Ws as an aid memoir, so we can keep referring back to it. Again, 7 Ws, how many are slightly tenuous Ws, but better go with it. The other thing I always do is I put how many to the top. So I always prefer to start with how many as my first question. So when it comes to a customer buy product and wanting to know, well, how many products did they buy? This is all about basically capturing the things that we want to measure. What are the things that we can count up or aggregate? We like to trend over time. For argument's sake. So the SUN model starts with a nice big circle, a bit like a sun in the middle, and you list all of your how many's in this. So for customer buying product, I might want to know things like revenue, costs, profit, the margin percentage, the unit quantity. It doesn't necessarily have to be exhaustive at first. I tend to find that a good half dozen is a fairly good start. You can always iterate and add to it as you go along. I worked with one customer and they could only think of one thing that they were really bothered about in terms of the how many's. Once we got into the process, we sort of ended up kind of like jogging people's, getting the cogs grinding as it were, and they thought of a few more which we added as we went. But yeah, don't try and be too exhaustive. People can get bogged down in trying to think of every single last thing. You can basically get the essentials. That's a great starting point, and you can always build iteratively from there. So having asked the how many when it comes to customer buys products, Next question, who buys the product? There is already a clue in the title of the event because the customer buys the product. So we're going to add to our sum model the concept of a customer. So I'm going to create a spoke. This is my customer spoke. Having identified that, we're not going to stop there. We're going to say, right, okay, the customer buys the product. What information about the customer do we need to know? What additional information, other things about this customer concept are important to you? So, for example, they might want to know their customer name. They want to know the date of birth. So they can do some analytics around ages. They might want to know other demographic information, things like that. They might want to know things like gender, for argument's sake. If anyone's ever built a customer dimension before, they tend to be a lot more detailed than that, but the screen's not that big. Just for the sake of brevity and demonstration, you basically ask, what are things about your customer that you'd like to know? Once we've asked the who, we move on to the what. And much like the who, the clue is already in the title. So we already said who does what. The customer buys the product. So the what here is going to be product. And then we go through the same process again. What else about products would business stakeholders like to know? So they might want to know things like product code, product name, product description, what colour the product is, so they know whether or not red sells better than blue, for argument's sake. So we've done a what. Oh no, I've got my things the wrong way around. It should be when next. Oh, category as well. So it should be when next. Pretty much every star schema ever invented has some kind of date associated with it. Especially in Power BI world, it's pretty important to have a separate date table for the time intelligence. So for the when did they buy the product? So we want to know by date. Something like a date, we can model a little bit differently. So you might want to roll up your dates by month, so you can see monthly sales, and then by quarter, and then by year. So whereas with customer and product, we've got a set of spokes coming out from the concept. For date, it's in a straight line, and that's indicating hierarchy. So that's something that we can roll up by. You can have more than one hierarchy if you like. So especially with a kind of date concept, might not want to just roll up via the calendar. You might want something like financial periods and things like that. It's not unusual to have like financial weeks and financial periods, like 445, those kind of things. So you can have more than one hierarchy on a given concept and just add more than one hierarchy. So after the when, then we do the where. So for argument's sake, where did they buy it? Or which store did they buy it from? And again, you can mix and match your hierarchies and use individual spokes. So again, location analytics is always quite a good classic for a hierarchy. So I'm going to be able to roll up by my store location by city, county, country, region. And then I've got individual attributes there for specific sort of latitude and longitude. Why? Why did my customer buy the product? I'm going to say because it was on promotion. So I might want to sort of capture something around what promotion happened when they were buying this, and things like promotion code and promotion description. And then once we've done the why, how did the customer buy the product? So how did they pay for it? So I've got here cash card or finance, and then who's the payment provider potentially for that as well. And that is a finished sum model. So I was demonstrating this to some stakeholders once, and after we'd gone through this process, they turned around to me and said, "Oh, it's like, you know, I don't done mind mapping before. It's like, this is like a mind map for your data. This is great. I can sort of understand all my connections and how everything goes together." So it's quite business friendly and accessible from that perspective. From a developer's point of view, this looks a hell of a lot like a star schema. So whenever I run these workshops with business users, I make a point of trying my very best to never say the words dimension or fact. But ultimately, if you look at this, this is going to be a sales fact table, and these are the things I'm going to need in the fact table. That's going to be a customer dimension. That's going to be a product dimension. We've got ourselves a star schema. So we've got here a nice sort of skeleton, a blueprint for a star schema. Now, theoretically, I would say that certainly in some teams I've worked with, we just gave them this, and they were like, "Great, I can build technical implementation from this. I can go away and do the logical model." I can turn that into understanding where all my foreign keys and primary keys and surrogate keys and relationships need to be, and they went with it. And then for the end users, they just had a mind map of their data that they could interpret. That's the framework. That's how we go about advanced analytics in all the organizations I've worked at. A collaborative way to build a star schema, get business users on board, get them involved in the process, bring them on that journey with you, and look to build something that answers the questions, gets them thinking outside of the box. So again, if we sort of think back to that user model at the beginning, there's so many things we've identified by going through the 7 Ws that we couldn't have identified from that user model, from that first graph. We've made them think outside of the box and possibly think about things that maybe they even hadn't thought about. Other things that are worthwhile noting for this then, so other tips and advice. You should ask the 7 Ws multiple times, as often there is more than one answer. So again, for brevity and for the sake of demonstration, I gave one example of each W. In actual fact, when we run the workshops, that's not how we operate. So we say, who buys the product? The customer buys the product. And then we do our customer spoke. And then we say, okay, who else is involved when the customer buys the product? So if this is a high street retail example, you might want to know who the salesperson is. So at that point, you'd do another spoke and you'd have salesperson here. And then you'd say, okay, what information about the salesperson do you want to know? And you just go, oh, well, so their name, I want to know who their manager is. I want to know how long they've worked here, those kind of things, for argument's sake. So ask the 7 Ws multiple times, because there's often more than one answer, and ask all of the 7 Ws multiple times. You keep going until you run out of options. So ultimately you get more spokes. Kind of the opposite of that is that for some Ws, there might not be an answer, and that's okay. It's not about a tick box that says that we have to have an answer for each one. Often the how and the why can be quite abstract. So sometimes if you're running this as a workshop and you say, oh, well, why did somebody do something? And it's a bit of a head scratcher because it might not be obvious. So obviously I had an example of it was on promotion. Why else? I don't know. They were in a good mood. You don't have to have an answer if there's not a concrete way to find one. One sum model per event. So one of the worst things you can do at this point is trying to jam more than one event into a single sum model. So taking a retail example, and again, sort of thinking of the type of examples I've had with other clients. All right, well, I want to know when the customer buys the product, I want to know what my stock level is. Well, that's a different event. That's not about the customer buying it. That's about your processing and your stock keeping and those kind of things. It's something different. If you try and jam more than one event into one sum model, it just doesn't work. You've got to always keep focused on that one headline. Which event are we working on at this point in time? You can hold multiple workshops if necessary, so don't try not. Typically, one workshop per event works well. So when I talked about doing the event discovery workshop, where we try and list all the events and then prioritize them, we'll quite often arrange the follow-ups, and it'll be one per event. If you try and do more than an event in one workshop, then people get a bit of fatigue with it to an extent. So we try and break them up into lots of little steps instead. You can do this before data discovery if you like. So when I say data discovery, I mean as an analyst, that thing where you dive into the customer's database and try and figure out which tables have got which information in. I know some people who prefer to do the discovery up front. So they've got an idea of what data is going to be available to them. I personally prefer to go into this blind to what data is available and encourage people to tell me what they want, as opposed to just try and mold their requests to how I think the data already works. If I looked in an ERP system or a sales engine and I already see a sales order table and an orders table, it can almost influence your thinking and try and drive it down a preempted direction, as it were. So I personally try and do this before data discovery. What we actually do then is, having mapped everything out, do the data discovery afterwards, where we say, right, for this concept, where can I find the data so that I can fulfill that particular requirement. Along those lines, this idea of don't get bogged down in what you already know about the data. So I'm talking about doing it before data discovery. and try not to preempt what data's there. Some of this can be quite aspirational. So like the silly example that I always use is, for argument's sake, on the customer data. If somebody in the workshop says, oh, I want to be able to do customer eye color because I want to be able to slice and dice whether or not we sell more fridges to people with blue eyes or people with brown eyes. And you know full well that the CRM doesn't hold eye color as an attribute, because that would be mental. Capture it anyway. What you can do is you can use that to feed back to the business systems owners after the event that, oh, actually, did you know your stakeholders want to be able to do this analysis? But the data we're capturing doesn't support the requirement. Maybe you should be adding this to your roadmap so that in the future we can retinal scan every customer and capture their eye color. I don't know. It's a silly example, but allow it to be aspirational. Allow yourself to potentially capture concepts, even if you know that the data might not exist, because you can plug those gaps or suggest plugging those gaps further down the line. You might want to use your conceptual model to go away and design a logical model. So as I say, with some teams, we just literally gave them the sum model and then they went off and built what they needed to build based entirely on that. I've worked with other clients and customers who wanted a bit more assurance around the design, and so they asked us to turn the sum model into a proper ERD diagram and capture the proper sort of technical definition. So that's kind of an optional step, but something that they might want to do. But also bear in mind that this first iteration from a sum model perspective isn't necessarily the fixed or finished design. Very much, there's got to be an element of pragmatism. You've got to make sure that your business stakeholders recognise that just because it went on the sum model, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go into the delivery. It means it's going to be, try our best to meet these requirements. But as we go through the data discovery, if we find something that doesn't exist, really sorry, we can't put eye colour in there because we don't capture the data today. You've got to be a bit more pragmatic. The other thing that can happen with that is you might discover that you've got two concepts on some model, and when you look at the actual data, it's the same thing. So you might end up consolidating some concepts because it's practical to do so when you actually look at how the data is really stored. So yeah, it's kind of the target data model, but there has to be an element of pragmatism as we go, and you've got to be open to the fact that might change as you go through delivery. And then finally, you can consolidate multiple submodels into a bus matrix. So if you model more than one business event, you might want to capture that in a bus matrix. If you're not familiar with a bus matrix, this is a Kimball artifact, something that Ralph Kimball recommends you doing, where basically you take all of your events and then all of the concepts you've identified, which become your dimensions, and then you basically do a matrix to see where there's commonality. Now, where this can be quite useful is it can help you prioritize what you might want to do first. Given that product and date are dimensions that we're going to use everywhere, perhaps when it comes to doing delivery, you can build those first, maybe get those into the hands of end users early as a first iteration, and then sort of worry about some of the other dimensions further down the line. So as much as I love this little framework that I've kind of sort of helped develop, it's not perfect. There's definitely a few gaps in there. So first of all, it assumes everywhere that we've got one-to-many relationships. It's assuming that for a given sale, there's only going to be one customer. It's assuming for a given transaction, there's going to be one product. And life's not like that. I think bank accounts is kind of like the classic example where, I mean, me and my wife have got a joint bank account. So for a direct debit, there are two customers. We both pay the mortgage effectively. So you've got to be wary when you're doing this. I will try and confirm as I go. Right, we're saying for a given sales transaction, there is one customer. Yes, there's one customer, great. One I did recently is a supply chain one. And for a given shipment, they only wanted the details at a shipment level, but you can have multiple products on one shipment. It's a big shipping container thing. And there wasn't a way to resolve that to a single record in terms of some of the delivery aspects of it. So you end up with a many-to-many relationship there, which from a Power BI perspective, you'll solve using a bridge table. So if you come across examples of that whilst you do it, you've just got to almost make notes of it and accommodate the fact that not everything is just a perfect star. You might have to have some bridge table and snowflaking going on. And the other thing that it doesn't call out at all is types of dimension. So people familiar with the concept of things like slowly changing dimensions, type 2 slowly changing dimension, which captures history over time. I think there are like 7 types of slowly changing dimension. If anyone's used anything beyond 0, 1, and 2, I'm normally quite surprised. But yeah, in terms of the way we run this, we don't really capture that detail at this point. What I found so far, that hasn't been a hindrance. When we've come to implementation, when we've actually come to actually do the work, we've sort of continued having a dialogue with our business users and whether or not they need to capture history over time or not, as always ends up coming out of the wash. So I've not been burned by it yet, but it's just be aware of it if you decide to go down this route. How am I doing for time? I have seen the pizza arrive, so I'll try not to keep it too much longer. Last couple of bits. Make this your own. So I talked about the fact there that this kind of framework and technique was me taking 2 data modeling techniques that I'd come across and bastardizing them, taking the bits that I liked, getting rid of the bits I didn't like, and then coming up with my own thing. If any of this has resonated with you tonight and you think, oh, there's some good stuff there, actually, I think I might try this next time. I need to do some design work with my stakeholders. By all means, if you want to attempt this exactly the way I've outlined it today, awesome, fantastic, go ahead. But also, if there's some of this stuff where you think, well, yeah, I don't really like that bit, that was rubbish, cool, go away, make your own thing, take the bits that make sense to you and roll with them. Bits that don't make sense to you, feel free to jettison them. I'm not going to hunt you down if I feel to find out you've done my data modeling approach wrong. Please make it what you will, and hopefully there are at least some takeaways for you. Speaking of takeaways for you, pizza is definitely here. This is the bit where I said that when I wasn't sure how much time I was going to have, I think I've got 5 minutes still. Does anyone want to have a quick look at Ellie, which is this data modeling tool suite? So, pre-recorded demo. I feel like I've got my Microsoft Keynote on at this point because I just recorded it because I've done it. So this is what Ellie looks like. We come over to create something here. I'm going to create a conceptual model. So my conceptual model that I'm going to create here is around my customer buys product example. So when I create that, I get this kind of whiteboard type canvas. Up here, I want to create a sales object, which is going to be my how many's in the middle. Once I've got that object and I'm going to expand it and drill into it, I can add to it the things that I wanted to add. So again, to keep it brief, I'm just going to add my sales amount in there, and I'm going to add my unit quantity, I think, from memory. So this is almost like interactive dashboard. You can use this collaboratively. I've done my very simple middle of my sum model there. You can even color code it. So I've color coded that as a fact table. Next, I'm going to add a customer table. So customer tables in there as well. I can go in, I'm adding customer name, gender, date of birth, and demographic. I spelled it wrong and I went back and did it right. Color code that is dimension. What am I going to add next? I'm going to add product. So I'm going to capture all my product entities. So this is kind of like how we'd be doing a sum model anyway. And then there's me product entity there. I'm going to do my date table. So I'm going to put date, month, quarter, and years. I don't want to press by how fast I can type. I can create my relationships with some crowfoot notation as well. So I've got like a very basic model going on there. That was a basic sum model. I can do my data discovery at this point, where I can start building out a glossary to describe what it means, give some examples, say which source system this is going to come from. So when I come to implementation, I know that I need the data from my sales engine, from the sales.sales field. Yeah, so I can do that data dictionary type stuff, and then I can come here, convert that logical model, that conceptual model to a physical model. And at this point, it's taken that blueprint, that sort of very basic high level blueprint, and it's turned it into the technical version of it. And I still need to enhance it because I need to do things like I need to add primary keys and constraints. I've got those constraints wrong and just ignore that, it's fine. I can add my data types at this point, so I can start mapping out actually what types of data are these things and start adding the technical details. I can then put the foreign key onto my facts table, and then that will, from a relationship perspective, put that relationship up, and it changes color because it now recognizes I've got a good relationship. So this is me doing all the same stuff again. I'm just basically adding surrogate keys and surrogate key, primary key and foreign key relationships, and adding like just additional bits and things like the data types and things like that. And then once I've built all that, actually builds the DDL for me as well. So basically, I've gone from a conceptual model where I've just like done almost like a whiteboarding exercise, built a business glossary associated to that conceptual model, turn that conceptual model into a logical model, and then it's even written SQL for me. So it's that example is Snowflake, which I don't like Snowflake. Databricks is in the pipeline. Fabric is already supported from that DDL perspective. But yeah, when I started doing this, it took me so long to find some software that supported the workflow I wanted to. And I have forever just used Miro boards, and then you can export Miro boards to CSV, and then I've taken those CSVs and then, right, okay, now I've got all of the things from the Miro board. I can start mapping out what my sources are and things like that. And this does it all. It's great. I really, really like it. So I don't know if anyone spotted it. We started off with a conceptual model. There's actually a whiteboard module as well, but the whiteboard module at the moment, you can't convert to a conceptual model, but that feature's coming too. So you can literally start, it's actually built on the Miro code. So you do a Miro whiteboard, turns it into a conceptual model that you can then add a bit more detail to. So you can then turn into a logical model, though it calls it a physical model. One that can build out the DDL. You can hook it up to Azure DevOps and source control your models. So if you want to make a change to a model, you can do like a pull request and change management and all that kind of stuff as well. For the data discovery piece, where you're sort of saying which source, for my customer name, where should I get this from? And I filled it in and said, oh, get it from the CRM, get it from the customer table in the customer name field. They've got a module where you can connect it up to the source system and then AI it. The AI will say, right, well, actually, because I can see all of the like the system tables anyway, and you're looking for something called customer name, right? Well, all of these tables in there have got customer name in it. So these are the ones you mean. So I'm really excited by Ellie, and I can't wait to do more things with it. That was everything I wanted to cover. Has anybody got any questions?
Yes, that's for you.
Yeah, good question. So their licensing at the minute is a little bit opaque. I'm on a free version of it, but that's because I reached out to them and showed some curiosity around it, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we'd love you to start using it and give us some feedback and that kind of thing." So you can get a free version, but in terms of what their vision is for it to be like for enterprise type stuff like ER Studio esque, and that in terms of that turning it into a platform whereby you could potentially turn that into like something that you hook up so that end users could use it as a data dictionary and see lineage and all those kind of things. There's the classic contact sales for more information. I couldn't flash up a screen that gives you nice transparent pricing for it, but I could refer you to people who do. I'm actually doing a webinar with them 20th of March. When's that? Like 2 weeks away. So if anyone follows me on LinkedIn, you'll see me harping on about that. Any other questions? Everyone wants pizza, don't they? These are all of my details, but then just to make it super easy, I try to get clever and do a QR code. So amongst that QR code is my GitHub. On my GitHub, there is a copy of the slide deck without the LE video, because it would press enough to have into GitHub. So without the LE demonstration in it, but all the other slides are in there. That was me. Yeah.